She counted 7 chairs. There were 8 of us. I watched my mother-in-law lift my daughter's plate off the table, calmly, deliberately, walk it down the hall, and set it on the laundry room dryer like something that needed to be stored away. June is 7. She had spent the entire drive holding a rolled-up drawing on her lap, a birthday surprise for her dad. She wouldn't let anyone peek. She never got to give it at the table. By the end of that night, my mother-in-law was standing on her own porch in the cold, but what finally broke the room wasn't what my husband said. It was the 2 pieces of paper I set down first. I'm Megan. I'm 34. I keep other people's financial records for a living, and for 3 years I kept the peace in a family that was spending my money while deciding my daughter wasn't real enough to sit with them. Not anymore. We live in a narrow blue house in Millbrook. June's drawings cover every inch of the refrigerator, taped over the handles so you have to peel one back just to get the milk. Greg is a quiet man with sawdust permanently in his shirt cuffs. He runs the floor at a cabinet shop 2 towns over. I married him 3 years ago when June was 4 and still called every man at the hardware store sir. His 2 older kids, Tyler and Hannah, 12 and 10, all opinions and sharp elbows, stay with us on weekends and half the summer. I love that house when it's full. I love it even more when nobody's keeping score. Here is the thing nobody had bothered to add up. I was the one keeping it running. The dentist appointments, the oil changes, the school schedules, which cousin was gluten-free, which relative wasn't speaking to whom. When Greg's parents needed something, the request came through him, and the money came quietly from me. I'm not a martyr about it. I'm a bookkeeper. Tracking what goes out and what comes back is just how my brain rests. Every family has one person who keeps the lights on. In our family, in that house, and in the house 40 minutes away in Cedar Hollow, that person was me. Not one of them had done the math on what that meant. I used to think that was fine. I used to believe the best kind of giving left no fingerprints. That was my mistake, and it took a 7-year-old standing in a doorway to finally show me what it cost. You don't keep the peace by paying for it. You just teach everyone around you that the peace is free. Every Sunday we drove the 25 minutes out to Cedar Hollow, where Greg grew up. Janet keeps a clean house and a cold ledger. From the very first dinner, she had a way of saying June's name that put a small, careful distance around it. And how's Megan's girl? She'd ask. Never our June, never the baby, just Megan's girl, set slightly apart, the way you set a dish aside that belongs to someone else. Tyler and Hannah got the good chairs. They got second helpings without asking. They were told they had the Walsh nose, the Walsh stubbornness, the Walsh everything. June was told to be careful on the stairs. The Christmas before, I watched Janet hand out gifts. Tyler and Hannah each had a stack. June had one small box, the kind you'd hand to a neighbor's child, not your own. I said something. Janet smiled and told me children shouldn't be spoiled. Their refrigerator in Cedar Hollow is bare metal. Tyler's school photo lives on it. Anna's ribbon from the science fair. Not one of June's drawings, though she brought a fresh one every single visit and pressed it into Janet's hands at the door. I found them later in the recycling, smoothed completely flat, as if Janet couldn't quite throw them out, but couldn't quite keep them either. Greg told me his mother came from people who measured worth in acres and last names. 5 generations on the same land before the bank took it. To Janet, blood wasn't sentiment, it was the only deed that could never be foreclosed. I understood her. That was the trouble. I understood her too well to hate her outright. So I let it slide, year after year, telling myself a child can't feel a temperature she's never been told to name. June felt it. She just didn't have the word yet. Roy's heart couldn't wait for anyone to figure out their feelings about June. 2 years ago, his cardiologist put him on a fistful of medications. The co-pays alone ran close to $500 a month. Then the roof at Cedar Hollow gave out over winter, $6,000 to replace, and more than they had. Roy's pension covers the basics and not much else. So the help started the way most help does. One transfer I told myself was temporary. I covered the medication, then the groceries, when the medication ate the grocery money, then the roof, paid in installments so it wouldn't land as one frightening number all at once. Greg knew. Janet assumed the money came from his wages, his shop salary, his good son's heart. I never corrected her. Correcting her would have meant a conversation, and conversations in that family always came with their own bill. So I set up the payments, and I logged every one of them, because logging things is what I do with my hands when my chest is tight. I never kept those records to use them. I kept them the way I keep every ledger, because numbers are the one thing in that family that never lie and never change their story depending on who's in the room. A column of figures doesn't care whose nose you have. It just adds up. Month after month, it added up, and the total grew into a quiet, heavy thing I carried without ever quite looking at directly. I could have told you the figure to the dollar at any moment. I just never said it out loud. There's a kind of giving that curdles when you keep it secret too long. It stops being generosity and starts becoming evidence. I didn't understand that yet. I was about to learn at a birthday party. Don't mistake my silence for softness. I had drawn the line more than once and watched it wash away every time. The first time, I sat Janet down at her own table and told her plainly that June was my daughter and her grandchild by marriage, and that the cold shoulder stopped now. Janet folded her hands and said she treated all children the same. Then she asked if I'd brought the receipts for Roy's prescription. The second time, I told Greg I was done funding a house where my child ate last. I meant it. I had the banking app open, my thumb hovering over the recurring transfer, ready to end it for good. That was the exact week Roy landed in the emergency room with chest pains. You can't cut off a man's heart medication to win an argument with his wife. So I closed the app. Greg asked me to give his mother more time. He always asked for more time. He's a peacemaker, my husband, and peacemakers are wonderful, until the day the peace they're protecting is being built on your daughter's back. I gave it. I told myself Janet was old, that this kind of prejudice would die with her generation, that I could outlast it with patience and a steady hand. I was wrong about the timeline. Cruelty doesn't get tired. It just waits for an audience. But I held one thing for myself through all of it, a private sentence I'd say quietly in the car on the way home, while June slept in her booster seat. Love isn't blood, it's who shows up. I whispered it like a prayer I didn't fully believe yet. I showed up. I'd been showing up for 3 years in dollars and casseroles and silence. That showing up was about to stop being silent. There was something Janet didn't know. Something Greg and I had been quietly building for the better part of a year. The previous spring, Greg came home from work and sat on the edge of June's bed while she slept. He just watched her for a long time. Then he found me in the kitchen and said he wanted to make it real, not step-dead. Father, on paper, in the courtroom, the kind that cannot be argued away at a dinner table. We hired a family attorney. Because we'd been married over a year and June had lived under our roof since she was 4, the process moved without a contested hearing. Her biological father had signed away his rights long before I ever met Greg. There was no one to fight us. 6 weeks before Greg's birthday, we drove to the courthouse in our good clothes. A judge with reading glasses asked Greg whether he understood that adoption made June his daughter in every legal sense, his heir, his responsibility for the rest of his life. No different from Tyler, no different from Hannah. Greg said yes before the judge finished the sentence. June got to bang the little gavel. The clerk laughed. We have a photo of June mid-swing, mouth completely open, Greg's hand steady on her wrist. Her name is June Walsh now. Walsh, like the nose, like the stubbornness, like the everything Janet had spent years telling her she would never be. We hadn't told the family. We were saving it. The way you save the best news for the moment it will land both hardest and kindest. Greg's birthday felt exactly right. We pictured Janet's face softening. Finally, a piece of paper doing what 3 years of casseroles never could. I kept the adoption decree in a manila envelope, flat and official, tucked into my bag. I told myself I brought it for the announcement. Part of me already knew better. Janet announced she'd host the birthday herself. That was new. Usually I hosted and she critiqued. This year she wanted it in Cedar Hollow. Her table, her rules, and Greg's sister Brenda would handle all the details. Brenda is 40, recently divorced, and orbits her mother the way a moon forgets it used to have its own light. She moved back to Cedar Hollow after the marriage ended and made herself the keeper of the family's small treasures, the photo albums, the holiday china, the question of who sits where. I offered to cook the way I always do. I offered to bring the cake and cover the catering. Brenda said in that bright voice that's really a closed door, they wanted to keep it family this year. Let family handle the family things. I let it go. I always let it go, but I ordered the cake anyway, because June had asked for the kind with white frosting and strawberries. And I had the baker pipe 8 names across the top. Vea, Mayan, June, Tyler, Ella, Janet, Roy, Brenda. 8 names. Then, I remember thinking it was a good number, a full number, the number of a family that had grown instead of shrunk. On the phone, Brenda asked if we'd need a kids' table, then answered herself before I could speak. Probably not, she said. Probably the children could sort themselves out. I should have heard it then. The trap was already set, the chairs already counted, in a house I didn't control. I was bringing a cake with 8 names to a table laid for 7. We drove out on a gray Saturday. The cake box belted into the middle seat like a third child. June wore the green dress she'd picked herself and held her rolled-up drawing on her lap the whole way. A surprise for Greg, she told us. No peeking. Tyler and Hannah rode with us too, fresh from their mothers, arguing about a video game in the easy way of kids who feel completely safe. Greg hummed along to something on the radio. I watched the fields go flat and gray outside the window and felt, for once, almost hopeful. Today we'd tell them. Today the paper would finally speak. Janet met us at the door with a hug for Greg, a nod for Tyler and Hannah, and a there she is for June that didn't quite reach her eyes. The house smelled like pot roast and lemon polish. I set the cake on the sideboard and did what I always do in an unfamiliar room. I counted 7 chairs, 7 plates, 7 napkins folded into little tents. I counted again, because I'm a bookkeeper and the first count is never the one I trust. 7. Brenda drifted over with a pitcher of water and caught me looking. We're a little tight on space this year, she said, not meeting my eyes, arranging the glasses just so. Tyler had already dropped into a chair. Hannah claimed the one by the window, which left, by my arithmetic, exactly enough seats for everyone at that table except one. June stood in the doorway still holding her rolled-up drawing, looking at the grown-ups, looking at the chairs, doing the same small math I was doing, and arriving at the same cold answer. She didn't say anything. She just moved a little closer to my side. Before dinner, a neighbor stopped by, the Hadleys from down the road, dropping off a birthday card for Greg. Janet lit up. She put one hand on Tyler's shoulder and one on Hannah's and presented them like prizes. These are the grandchildren, she said. Tyler's going to play ball in high school. Can you believe the size of him? The Hadleys made the right noises. June stood 18 inches away, still holding her drawing, smiling up at the adults, waiting to be introduced. She wasn't. Janet's hand never moved from Tyler's shoulder. The Hadleys said their goodbyes and drove home without ever learning June's name, because in that room, in that moment, June didn't have a name worth saying. June tugged my sleeve. She asked me the question she'd been circling for almost a year, finally said out loud, quiet enough that only I could hear. "Mommy, am I a grandkid too?" I knelt down right there on Janet's polished floor. I told her yes. I told her she was somebody's whole world and that the people who couldn't see it were the ones missing out. She nodded the way children do when they want to believe you and can't quite manage it yet. Behind me, I heard Janet and Brenda in the kitchen, not bothering to lower their voices much. Brenda murmured something about the seating, keeping it simple, and Janet said the thing she would say twice more before the night was over, the sentence that became the spine of everything that followed. "This table is for blood." June heard it. I watched it land on her. I watched her file it away next to the bare refrigerator and the recycled drawings and the one small Christmas box. She didn't cry. She just went very still, the way I go still, and I understood for the first time exactly whose daughter she was. Greg missed all of it. That's the particular cruelty of these moments. They happen in corners, in kitchens, in the half-second when the good man is in the other room. He was out on the porch with Roy, talking gutters and ball games, being celebrated the quiet way he liked best. He didn't see Janet's hand stay fixed on Tyler's shoulder. He didn't hear the sentence. If I had walked out and pulled him in right then, there would have been a scene, and June would have learned that her right to belong was something adults had to fight over in front of company. I didn't want her to carry that. So I made a calculation, the kind I make all day with other people's money. I weighed the cost of waiting against the cost of erupting, and I chose to watch a little longer. I kept June close. I kept my bag closer. Inside it, flat against the lining, was the manila envelope, and beside it, a second folder I had printed at midnight the night before and told myself I wasn't really bringing. 3 years of transfers. Tovo, sorted by category, medication, groceries, property taxes, the water heater. I had printed it while Greg slept, telling myself it was for my own records, for any reason but the real one. You don't bring your books to a birthday party unless some part of you already knows the party is going to become an audit. I stood in Janet's dining room with my daughter's hand in mine and a ledger in my bag, and I waited to see how far she would actually go. Before June could be steered away, she did the thing she'd been planning the entire drive out. She crossed to Greg, who'd just come in from the porch, and unrolled her surprise and held it up with both hands. "Happy birthday, Daddy." The room paused. It was a drawing of all of us, the way June draws, big heads, small bodies, a yellow sun in the corner with a smile on it, 5 figures in a row, holding hands. She'd labeled each one in her careful first-grade letters. Mommy, Daddy, me, Tyler, Anna. They were standing in front of the blue house in Millbrook. Everyone had the same enormous grin, even Tyler, who in real life had not grinned since he turned 12. Greg took it like it was made of glass. He got down on one knee to be level with her and looked at it for a long, quiet moment. I watched his jaw work. "This is the best present I've ever gotten," he said, and he meant every word. June glowed. Janet glanced at the drawing from across the room. Her mouth did a small, cold thing. "That's a nice drawing, sweetheart," she said, in the voice you'd use for a stranger's child who'd handed you a wilting dandelion. Then, brisk, turning to the room, "All right. Dinner's getting cold." She wanted the moment over. She wanted the 5-figure family folded up and put away, because a drawing of 5 people holding hands with June in the center was an argument against everything she had built her table on. Greg rolled the drawing gently and tucked it under his arm to keep it safe. He would forget he was holding it later. It would fall at the worst possible moment. but for now it was just a birthday drawing from a girl to her father, the best one he had ever gotten. June needed the bathroom before dinner. I took her down the hall, away from everything. While she washed her hands, I dug in my bag for a tissue. The manila envelope came up with it and slipped from my fingers onto the tile. It landed face up and slid open under the bathroom light. There it was, the adoption decree. Heavy paper, the county seal pressed into the corner, the judge's signature in real ink. In the matter of the adoption of a minor child, June Walsh, parent Gregory Walsh. The word heir wasn't on the page, but I knew the law behind it. A finalized adoption makes the child a legal child in every sense. Inheritance, benefits, damn, everything Tyler and Hannah had by birth, June now had by order of a court, and no dinner table anywhere on earth could repeal it. I picked it up off Janet's bathroom floor and smoothed it flat against my leg, the way I smooth every important document. Then I read it again, slower. June was drying her hands on the little guest towel that probably wasn't meant to be used. She didn't see my face. Good, because my face in that mirror had stopped being the face of a woman keeping the peace. I folded the decree back into the envelope along the crease I now knew by heart, and I made myself a quiet promise in that bathroom, the kind you don't walk back. Tonight, if Janet put one more hand on my daughter, this paper was going on her table, face up, in front of everyone. Not as a weapon, as a fact. The one thing in that family that didn't care whose nose you had. I slid the envelope back into my bag, where it sat against the folder of 3 years of figures. Fact beside fact. I took June's hand and walked her back toward a table that did not want her. Dinner was called. The choreography Janet and Brenda had rehearsed clicked into motion. Tyler and Hannah took their seats. Greg was waved toward the head of the table near Roy. Brenda put her hand lightly on June's back and began steering her away, toward the den, toward the folding tray and the cartoons and the quiet exile dressed up as a treat. Come on, sweetie, you get the special spot. June looked back at me, her feet dragging on the rug. Greg had just ducked into the kitchen to carry out the cake I'd brought, the one with 8 names piped across the top. His back was turned, his hands were full. He didn't see his sister walking his daughter toward a different room. I was already moving. Before I reached them, Janet intercepted. She stepped between me and June with the ease of a woman who has spent a lifetime managing rooms, and she put her own hand on June's shoulder, gently but firmly turning my daughter toward the hall. The children who belong at this table will sit at it, she said, pleasant as anything, loud enough for the whole room. June can eat in the den. It's nicer for her. She'll be more comfortable. That word again. Comfortable, the kindest sounding cruelty there is. The table went quiet. Tyler stopped mid-sentence. Anna looked at her grandmother, then at June, then down at her plate. I heard my own voice come out level and clear, the voice I use when clients' numbers don't add up and I already know exactly why. She's staying at this table. Janet turned to face me fully, and her pleasantness hardened into something she had been wanting to say for 3 years. Man, her hand stayed on June's shoulder. Let the real children sit with their father tonight. It's his birthday. June can have her supper in the den. There's no shame in it. She's just not. She paused. She chose the cruelest possible version of honesty. She's not his. Not really. Everyone here knows it. I'm not going to pretend at my own table. Out loud, in front of Tyler and Hannah and Roy and the rolled-up drawing tucked under Greg's arm in the next room, June stood frozen beneath her grandmother's hand. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the shape of them, the way a child always understands when an adult is making them small. And then Janet, sensing the room wobble, reaching for her anchor, said it one final time. This table is for blood. 3 times. I had now heard it 3 times. My hand went into my bag, and Janet, misreading me, decided to make her point with more than words. It happened fast, the way the worst things always do. June planted her small feet, because everything in her was telling her to stay near her mother, and Janet, impatient now, performing her authority for the table, gave her a push. Not a shove that would leave a mark. A push that said, "You are a thing I can move." A push toward the front door and the cold porch beyond it, as if my daughter were a draft to be shut out. June stumbled. Her hand flew out and caught the door frame, and the drawing, the one Greg had tucked under his arm and forgotten, slid loose in the commotion and dropped to the floor between them. All five of us, holding hands, face up on Janet's hardwood. Nobody spoke. The whole room had gone the particular silence of people who have just watched a line get crossed and don't yet know who is going to do something about it. Hannah's eyes filled. Tyler stood up so fast his chair scraped back. Roy half rose from his seat and sat back down. And June, my still, careful girl, looked at the drawing on the floor and then up at me, not crying yet, just waiting, the way she had waited her whole short life for an adult to fix the thing she couldn't name. I crossed the room. That was Janet's second mistake. Her first was thinking a 7-year-old was the easiest person in that house to move. Her second was believing I had kept 3 years of records for nothing. I reached my daughter. I put myself between her and the door. Behind me in the kitchen doorway, I heard the cake plate touch the counter as Greg finally turned around and saw the room he had walked back into. I knelt and picked up the drawing first. I don't know why that was the order, but it was the paper before anything else. I smoothed it the way I smooth all the papers that matter. Then I stood, lifted June onto my hip even though she is really too big for it now, and set her down behind me where the door couldn't reach her. I put my hand flat on her back through the green dress, steady, present, here, and I straightened to my full height between my daughter and her grandmother. I didn't shout. Picture the opposite of shouting. I looked Janet in the eye and said it slowly enough that every person in that room caught each word. "Don't you ever put your hands on my child again." Janet blinked. She wasn't used to being spoken to at her own table in a voice that didn't rise and didn't shake. People who rule by temperature don't know what to do with someone who has gone cold instead of hot. "I'm her grandmother," she started. "You're going to want to think very carefully about the next thing you say." Brenda pressed back against the sideboard. Tyler had come around the table to stand near June and me, 12 years old and furious in the way of a boy who doesn't have the words yet but whose body has already understood that something wrong just happened to someone he loves. The drawing was in my hand. The envelope was in my bag. And 3 years of everything I had quietly given that house, every prescription covered, every roof payment, every drawing rescued from the recycling, sat up in my chest all at once and became a single clear total. I was done keeping the peace. Greg stood in the kitchen doorway reading the room the way you read a car crash, all at once and too late. June behind me, eyes wet, the drawing in my hand, his mother's arm still half raised toward the front door. "He's not a fast man, my husband. He's a measure-twice, cut-once man. So he didn't come roaring in." He set the cake plate down on the counter very, very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to see what happened. Not loud, like mine. Janet decided how much of the truth to admit. Nothing happened. I asked June to eat in the den and Megan made a production of it. Tyler's voice cracked across the room before I could respond. Grandma pushed her. She pushed June into the door. A 12-year-old will tell the truth in a room full of adults who have all agreed to lie. God bless him for it. Hannah nodded, fast, backing her brother. Something settled in Greg's face then. Not rage. Something quieter and far more permanent, the look of a man recalculating every Sunday dinner of the last 3 years and arriving at a number he should have run a long time ago. Tell me exactly what my mother just did. Janet should have stopped. A wiser woman, or a less frightened one, would have read her son's face and pulled back. But Janet had built her entire life on a single principle, and when you've staked everything on one idea, you defend it past all reason, because the alternative is admitting the foundation was rotten the whole time. So she jumped. Don't you start, Gregory. Someone in this family has to be honest. That child is not yours. You took on Megan's daughter, fine, that was your choice. But don't ask the rest of us to rewrite the bloodline because you have a soft heart. Your real children, Tyler and Hannah, they're washes. They'll have this house someday. I won't sit here and watch you hand it to a stranger's child playing dress up at my table. The word stranger hit Greg like a slap. Brenda found her voice. Mom's right. Blood is blood. You can't just decide. I did decide, Greg said, still quiet, but the temperature had completely inverted. Janet was hot now, flushed and rising. Greg had gone cold, like me, the two of us standing in front of June, radiating the kind of stillness that frightens people far more than any shouting ever could. Roy looked up from the tablecloth, his old face gray. He knew a reckoning had arrived. I felt June's hand fist into the back of my dress. I felt the envelope in my bag, and I decided it was time to stop letting them argue about whether my daughter was real and start showing them exactly who in that room had been holding this family together all along. I reached into my bag. The room watched my hand the way you watch a magician, not knowing the trick, but knowing one is coming. I took out the manila envelope first. I didn't slam it. I didn't make a speech. I walked to the table, to the empty place where June's chair should have been, and I started speaking in the level voice I use for clients who have made a mess and need to hear the truth without flinching. Janet, for 3 years I have sat at your table and listened to you decide who counts. I let it go because Greg asked me to, and because I thought you would come around, and because I keep the peace. I set the envelope on the cloth. I'm not keeping it anymore. Love isn't blood, Janet. It's who shows up. Let me show you who has been showing up. I slid the first paper out and laid it face up on the table, turned so she could read it, the county seal catching the light. The room leaned in. Brenda craned her neck. Roy put on the glasses that hung around his neck. And Janet, who had just finished announcing to a room full of witnesses that my daughter was a stranger playing dress up, looked down at the heavy paper with the judge's signature on it and slowly began to understand what she was reading. That's a court order, I said. 6 weeks ago, in front of a judge, Greg adopted June. It is finalized. It is done. Her name is June Walsh. I let that sit. Let the county seal do its work. By law she is his daughter, not his stepdaughter. His daughter, full stop. The same as Tyler, the same as Hannah, which makes her your granddaughter, Janet, and his heir. Equally, exactly, is there, with the same legal claim to this house and this land you were just promising to the others. Janet's hand went to the edge of the table. You can't just, we did. A judge signed it. There is nothing to argue and no one to argue with, because June's biological father gave up his rights years ago, and Greg stood up in that courtroom and took them on purpose, because that is what showing up looks like when you put it on paper. I watched the color leave her face for the first time. She had spent this entire night, 3 years, standing on a single word, but, and here was the full weight of the law telling her that the word she had built her table on had been quietly, legally redefined, 6 weeks ago, in a courthouse she had never set foot in. Tyler, reading over Roy's shoulder, broke into a grin. So June's really our sister now? Like, for real? She was always your sister, Greg said. Now the law agrees." Hannah reached across and took June's hand, and June, who hadn't said a word since the doorway, looked at the paper with her name on it and then up at me, and something in her small face slowly uncreased. But I wasn't finished. "And that," I said, "is only the first piece of paper." I took out the folder. I laid it next to the decree and opened it to the summary page, the one with categories down the left side and totals across the bottom. 3 years of my handwriting, 3 years of my arithmetic. "You said this table is for blood. Let's talk about who has been keeping the blood fed." I touched the first line, Roy's heart medication. Every month for 2 years, approximately $500 a month, because that's what the co-pays run and his pension doesn't cover them. I moved my finger down. The roof. The winter it caved. $6,000, paid in installments so it wouldn't land as one frightening number. The groceries when the medication ate the grocery money. The water heater. The property taxes, twice. I turned the page so she could see the running total at the bottom. Underline twice, the way I underline every figure that matters. Just under $40,000, Janet, over 3 years, and not $1 of it came from Greg's wages. I let that land. It came from me, from the bookkeeper, from the stranger's kid's mother. I have been paying to keep this house warm the entire time you have been deciding my daughter doesn't belong in it." The silence had weight now, real weight. Brenda's mouth had come open, and Roy, gray-faced, quiet Roy, who had stayed out of it his entire life, looked at his wife and said the thing he should have said years ago. "Janet," his voice cracked, "it's all true." He had known. Of course he had known. He'd watched his prescriptions get filled and his roof get fixed, and he'd understood the money wasn't coming from his son's salary. He'd seen the envelopes, and he had said nothing, because saying something meant facing what it meant about the woman sitting across from him for 46 years. Now he said it. Too late to be brave, just in time to be honest. Janet stared at the total, at her husband, at the daughter she had called a stranger, whose mother had been quietly carrying her household for 3 years without a single word. The foundation she had built her whole table on cracked clean down the middle. And Janet did the only thing left to a person whose argument has completely collapsed. She got loud. She snatched the napkin off her lap and threw it on the table. Her voice cracked up into something raw and shrill I had never once heard from her in 3 years of cold control. "How dare you? How dare you bring money into this, into my home, at my son's birthday? This is exactly the kind of thing you do, thinking you can buy your way into being family. You think a checkbook makes that child blood." She was on her feet, both hands flat on the cloth, leaning toward me, flushed to the hairline. Brenda reached for her arm. Janet shook her off. "Get that paper off my table. Get it off. This is my house. This is my family. And I will decide who sits at this table." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. That is the part I want you to hear, because it is the only part that ever actually wins. The louder she got, the quieter I got, until the gap between us was the whole story. "I'm not raising my voice, Janet. I don't need to. The numbers already did." I rested my hand flat on the folder. "And I didn't bring money into this. You did? You brought it the day you decided some children eat at the table and some children eat by the door. I just wrote down what it cost." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There is a specific silence that falls on a person who has always controlled every room she walks into, and has just lost that control in front of everyone she controls. Roy was looking at her like he was seeing her plainly for the very first time. Tyler had his arm around June. Hannah was crying quietly. And Greg, who had stood beside me through all of it without a word, finally set June's drawing down on the table between the decree and the ledger, smoothed it flat, and stepped forward. He put his finger on the drawing, on the 5 figures holding hands, on the word Daddy in June's careful letters. He looked at his mother and then at his father, and he spoke in the low, even voice that, I realized in that moment, he had handed down to his daughter without either of them ever knowing it. You pushed my daughter out the door. He let that sit. My daughter. I sat in a courtroom 6 weeks ago and swore to be her father for the rest of my life. And tonight, at my own birthday, in my mother's house, you put your hands on her and shoved her toward the cold like she was nothing. His jaw worked once. So here's what happens now. We are going to walk out that door together. All 5 of us, the family in this drawing. And the checks stop tonight. Every dollar that has kept this house warm came from the woman you just humiliated and the child you just called a stranger. If June isn't family, Mother, then neither is the money. You don't get to feed off this family and spit on half of it at the same time. Janet went white, not pale, white, the color of someone watching the ground open beneath them. Roy made a small sound and covered his eyes. Brenda sat down hard in the chair she'd been guarding all evening. The inheritance she had been quietly policing all night suddenly revealed as a house her brother's wife had been keeping afloat. Janet reached one hand toward Greg, toward the only son who had ever protected her from the consequences of herself. For the first time in his life, he didn't take it. Happy birthday to me, he said, almost gently. I'm spending it with my family. He picked up the drawing and the decree. He handed me the folder, and he reached down and lifted June into his arms. We didn't storm out. Storming out is for people who haven't already won. We gathered our things the way you leave any dinner, except quieter, with a whole room watching. Greg carried June on his hip, her face tucked into his neck. I picked up the folder and the envelope and slid them back into my bag. Fact beside fact. And then Tyler did the thing I will remember longest. He stood up from the table he had been told his whole life was his by right. He looked at his grandmother, and he said, She's our sister. If June can't sit here, I don't want to either. Then he walked over and took June's hand, the one that wasn't fisted in Greg's collar. Hannah followed her brother without a word, the way she follows him everywhere. And just like that, the 2 blood grandchildren had voted with their feet, and Janet's entire bloodline had chosen the stranger's kid. We walked to the door, all 5 of us, the same front door Janet had tried to push June through an hour earlier. We went through it together, on our own feet. The cold porch air was sharp and clean after the heat of that room. Behind us, nobody spoke. Brenda didn't follow. Roy half rose and sat back down, his last small failure of the night. And Janet stood at the head of her perfect table with her perfect china and her 7 careful place settings, watching the family she had spent 3 years sorting into real and not real walk out her door as one unsorted whole. The drawing was safe under Greg's arm. The decree was in my bag. And June, halfway to the car, lifted her head off her father's shoulder and looked back at the house. Not said, just done. The way I get done. And I knew whose daughter she was all over again. Halfway home, down the dark county road, June finally spoke. Did I do something wrong? Greg answered before I could, his eyes on the road and his voice rough. No, you did everything right just by being you. She fell asleep before the highway, the way kids do after they've held it together longer than they ever should have to. The checks stopped that week. I closed the recurring transfers I had set up 3 years earlier, and the quiet money that had been keeping Cedar Hollow warm went quiet for good. I'm not a cruel person. Whatever Janet decided that night, Roy's heart is still bad, and I won't punish an old man's arteries for his wife's pride. So I set up something new, the direct line to the pharmacy that covers his essential medication only, paid straight to them. Nothing that passes through Janet's hands or pays for her version of family. It comes with one condition. written down, because I write everything down. The day she is willing to call June her granddaughter, and mean it, we will talk about the rest. Until then, the door stays open the only way that matters, from our side. Roy called once alone, said he was sorry in the cracked voice of a man who knows that sorry is a down payment on a debt he cannot fully repay. I believe he meant it. Janet hasn't called. Brenda hasn't either. The hallway in Cedar Hollow still has its wall of grandchildren. June's photo will never hang there. That is their loss to carry now, not my daughter's. Our refrigerator in Millbrook is still covered edge to edge in her drawings. And last week she added a new one, taped right over the handle the way she always does. 5 figures holding hands in front of a blue house. She labeled it the same as always. Mommy, Daddy, me, Teller, Ella. She started signing them too. June Walsh. Blood decides who you're related to. Showing up decides who your family is. And I have learned to keep very good records of exactly who shows up. June still draws our family with 5 people holding hands. The 8th plate, the manila envelope. The door Janet held open, in the end, only for herself. If someone in your life keeps score of who's real, show them who shows up instead. Share this with a mother who has ever had to stand her ground in a doorway. Tell me in the comments who shows up for your kids. Subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. We'll keep the door open. We'll keep the books. We'll see you next time.